The reason I came to the floor today was because on September the 9th, the President of the United States took to the microphone and told the American people his patience was wearing thin, was the comment he made to the American people. My patience is wearing thin, therefore I'm going to start mandating that individuals across the country have to receive a vaccine, to which he then put out an executive order across to federal workers in particular, and told federal workers they would have to have a vaccine by the end of this year to be fully vaccinated complete. The deadlines that he put in place for the Moderna vaccine, they would have had to have had the first shot by last week. By the Pfizer vaccine, they would have already had to have the first shot by this week. And then the J&J vaccine, they would have to have it by in a couple of weeks to be fully complete. And he laid down this statement to say, everybody needs to get vaccinated, and then walked away. Office of Personnel Management, Office of Management and Budget, then tried to start engaging to start catching up on this because there was no rule that was in place. It was an executive action. I quickly started getting phone calls from individuals in my state that were exceptionally concerned about that are federal workers that have worked for the federal government for decades, that had questions about religious accommodation or medical exceptions. Or, quite frankly, they had already had COVID and recovered from it, and they were concerned about the vaccine coming in, that they would have some kind of relapse at some point. It's exceptionally rare, but if it's them and they walk back through it, it's their prerogative. So I started asking questions immediately. I went to the CDC to ask if they have studied the 44 million Americans that have already had COVID and recovered. Would their recommendation be those individuals don't have to have the vaccine if they can show they already have the antibodies in their system? And the answer I got back from CDC is we've not studied it yet. A year and a half in, we've not studied it yet. I went to the Office of Management and Budget to be able to visit with them. I heard one set of issues from them. 24 hours later, I met with the Office of Personnel Management. I heard a different set of issues that came from them, literally in conflict with each other 24 hours apart. They put out guidance, they put out a second set of guidance, but each set of guidance they put out becomes more chaotic in the process. People that have worked remotely throughout this entire time of COVID and still continue to work remotely are a little confused why they're now being suddenly mandated to have a vaccine. Individuals that have already had COVID, as I mentioned before, and have recovered are a little confused why they're being mandated to be able to do this. Individuals with medical accommodations that have asked for those, that literally are showing up with paperwork from their physician saying this person's currently under cancer treatments, they do not need to have the vaccine at this point during the moment of treatments, are being told by some people, no, that doesn't count. The CDC has said it's okay. Your doctor's note doesn't count. And by others, they're being told, no, that does count. You can delay it. One set of rules from one agency, one set of rules from another. In fact, even within the same agency, to department, it's even a different set of rules. Some agencies have said that the volunteer advisory boards are also included. Other agencies are saying no, voluntary advisory boards are not included into this mandate. Some are receiving word in state agencies in my state that because your agency takes federal funds, everyone in your state agency also has to be vaccinated, or we will cut off the federal funds to your state. Some agencies are not calling with that same request. The contractors that work with the federal government were told they were also included in this executive order mandate and that everyone in their company needs to also be vaccinated, except the contractors are asking very simple questions. Is it everyone in our company, or is it everyone that actually works on the contract for the federal government? They can't get a straight answer on that. And as simple as it is, even for those contractors that have asked, they've said, no, wait a minute, we have a contract already. Are you, as the president, trying to write in an additional stipulation into our contract that we didn't agree to based on an executive action? You don't have legal authority to be able to do that. Is this about the current contract, or is this about future contracting? And they've not been able to get an answer on that. Quite frankly, we as a body, I'm still fighting to make sure contractors don't have human trafficking in their contracting and get suspension for this. But apparently with this executive order, companies can still have human trafficking and not be suspended, but if they're not 100% vaccinated, they will be. This is a bizarre world we're living in currently right now. This mandate came out for federal workers, federal contractors, maybe volunteer advisory boards, maybe state agencies 6 weeks ago, and everyone's still asking questions, what in the world? And in the meantime, real families in real life situations are dealing with the consequences of the debris field behind this. One of my Social Security agencies in my state, folks that take care of those folks at the Social Security office to get their card to them, to get questions to them about Social Security, one of them, there are 8 employees in that little agent, that little spot. 4 of the folks are talking about leaving because they're concerned about the vaccine mandate and they're not getting their questions answered. If that happens, the folks in that part of my state will not be able to get access to Social Security cards, will not be able to get their answers. So what's happening? People are struggling with a long-term career, deciding whether they're going to leave, literally if they're going to follow their doctor's orders or if they're going to follow somebody from the CDC they've never met before and their orders that are coming down. Federal contractors are trying to figure out how they can complete a contract because the President of the United States inserted a new element into their contract. And oh, by the way, many federal union workers are contacting my office saying, what in the world? This was not part of our collective bargaining agreement. Literally, the President is adding a new element to our collective bargaining agreement after the fact and saying, I know you're a union member, but your local unions are not going to represent you, and they haven't. And they're going to their stewards, they're going to others and saying, hey, I need somebody to represent me here in this, and they're telling them no. The President just inserted something into our collective bargaining agreement, and you can do nothing about it. And federal union employees are ticked because they thought their union represented them, not the President of the United States. Now, to be clear, I took the vaccine as soon as it was eligible for me. My wife did the same, my daughters did the same. I am incredibly grateful for the vaccine. I encourage people all over my state and have from the beginning to take the vaccine. It has gone through a rigorous scientific process. But people in my state, like the 49 other states in this great country, all know this fact to be true. There are side effects for some people in the vaccine. It's a small group, but no one knows if they're in that group until they take the vaccine. There are also dramatic effects for people that get COVID. Some people are asymptomatic, literally get it, recover, never even knew they had it. Some people die from it in a horrible death in a hospital. You never know until you get it. That's why each individual American has to be able to evaluate their risk of whether they're going to risk it to get COVID or risk it to get the vaccine. I think the risk is much lower in getting the vaccine. Science has proved that number to be accurate, but you know what? I don't get to decide for them. They have to decide for them. I can bring information to them and let them make the decision, but instead, the President of the United States has stood up and said, my patience is wearing thin. You have to do what I say, regardless if you're under cancer treatments, regardless if you're under any other process. I even asked the Office of Personnel Management, what are you going to do for religious accommodations? The answer came back, we cannot decide someone's sincerity. The next day, I talked to the Office of Personnel Management, which is actually putting the details together, and they gave me a 7-point decision-making process to help people decide if someone's religious beliefs are sincere or not. This is a mess. And there are lots of people that are caught up in this that just want their government to help them, not fire them for making a decision that affects their personal life and their family. That is why I've been after this for 6 weeks since the famous "I'm losing patience" speech. For 6 weeks I have talked about this. For 6 weeks I have made phone calls to every entity I can make phone calls, written letters, brought legislation. For 6 weeks I've brought these issues up and said this is the real problem that's out there. For 6 weeks I'm not being heard on this. And there are Americans in my great state that are now having to decide if they're going to leave a career they love, serving their neighbors, or if they're going to be compelled to take a vaccine risk just because the president has said, my patience is wearing thin. Just to reinforce a simple statement about people making decisions on risks, it's interesting to me. The 1st of October, another executive order came out and said if individuals take the vaccine and they're a federal worker because of this new mandate, and they do have severe side effects from it, we'll cover them medically. That was a little reminder to some people that were hesitating of why they hesitated. Listen, why don't we go back to doing what we do as Americans? Respect each other. Encourage people to do the right thing. Incentivize. But this chaotic mandate, where you don't know if you're a federal contractor, you don't know the rules if you're a federal employee, you don't know the rules if you're under an advisory board, you don't know the rules even if you're in a state agency. And by the way, the deadlines for Moderna and Pfizer have already passed and you still don't know the rules. They're nearing a moment of being fired and no one even has the details yet. Please. Why don't you listen to the people in your own state asking very straightforward questions? This is not about whether you should take the vaccine. This is, are you going to fire a 25-year federal employee because they disagree with you? That's what this is all about. So as if in legislative session, I ask unanimous consent that the Committee on Homeland Security and Governmental Affairs be discharged from further consideration of my bill that sets aside this executive order from the President, S. 2879, and that the Senate proceed to its immediate consideration. I further ask that the bill be considered read a third time, passed, and that the motion to reconsider be considered made, laid upon the table. Madam President, I understand my friend's statement from Michigan. I have to tell you, though, I wish this was rolled out in an orderly fashion. It's been 6 weeks of chaos and unanswered questions, and this federal government is about to fire thousands of federal employees because they did not bend to their will. Many federal employees that asked for a medical exemption and were told no. Literally, that brought a letter from their doctor and were told no. Individuals that asked for a religious accommodation and were told no, they will not get it. It's one thing to say it's offered, it's another thing to say it was actually extended. I would tell you from talking to people in my state in the federal workforce, they are not getting those orderly religious accommodations, those orderly medical exemptions. They're not getting it. They're being told, no, it's a mandate. And then they're being told, you're about to lose your career, is it worth it? These are individuals literally choosing between their health and their job. By this January, I don't know how many thousands of federal employees we're going to have out of our system and how much wisdom we're going to lose out of all these agencies. But this horrible game of chicken that the president's right now playing with not only federal employees, but with people all over the country is a terrible thing to do to our economy and to individuals that are seeking the best service. It is amazing to me how many individuals served through the entire pandemic faithfully and took great risks to be able to serve their neighbors that literally the president's about to fire as their thank you. That is wrong. That is wrong. I stood last week and talked to individuals that work for American Airlines who are really concerned and frustrated, who love working with American Airlines, but are now receiving a mandate coming down on them that they are digging in and saying, I'm not going to do it. I've already had COVID. I've recovered. I have natural immunity. Why am I being asked to do this as well? And they're getting only that the president is mandating it. And we do federal work, and so it's going to be required. It's the same thing happening to packing companies, to manufacturers, to small businesses around the country. Let me just read you a story. One employee that called our office last week is currently in cancer treatment for the 4th time and is receiving an experimental treatment. She's being told that she will be terminated from her job November the 24th if she doesn't get vaccinated because the president is requiring it on everyone. That does not sound like an accommodation that's occurring because of medical accommodations. It's nice to say in DC, talk to the people in your state what's actually happening on the ground. All this push that's happening around healthcare workers all around the country, what does that really look like? Well, we talked to an administrator of one of our nursing homes. Most of the individuals in our nursing homes, thankfully, as residents and as staff have been vaccinated, but some have had COVID and they're concerned about getting the vaccine. Whether that's rational or not, that's where they are, but they have natural immunity. This particular nursing home that we talked to, 20% of her employees have said that they will not take the vaccine. This particular nursing home in a rural area will close and expose all of those residents and their families to chaos because Biden said, I'm losing patience. It is one thing to say we need to be able to push back on this pandemic. I absolutely agree. It is another thing to irrationally close down nursing homes that are taking care of patients that, by the way, were filled with people, frontline workers, that put their life at risk last year to serve people, and now to push those people out and fire them this year? You're welcome, apparently, is what the president should be saying to them. All I'm asking for is reason. All I'm asking for is to consider those 44 million Americans that have natural immunity and to accept what we all know scientifically to be true. All I'm asking for is real medical exemptions. That's not irrational. All I'm asking for is real religious accommodations. Those are things that should be straightforward, common sense, and doable. But for whatever reason, the train is barreling down the tracks. In the debris field are federal workers, individuals that work in private companies, healthcare workers across the board. I just this weekend received an email, that was a long email, from a very shy physician in one of our major hospitals in Tulsa, who she told me flat out, I don't seek personal attention, I don't do media stuff. In fact, she said, I don't even have social media at all. But she detailed out her healthcare decisions and what was going on in her own life and said, I do not want to receive this vaccine. And as a physician at a major hospital in Tulsa, she is about to lose her job because President Biden's patience is running thin. What do her patients do next? Mr. President, don't play chicken with our families. This is real to them. They do not need to lose their job because they have medical conditions, religious accommodations, or they have natural immunity. They've suffered through COVID once, and now you're going to fire them for that? Let's have a real dialogue, not a rushed, my patience is wearing thin. With that, I yield the floor.